In light of what is happening in Bilad Ash-Sham, I thought that one of the things that I should do is to discuss some of the hadith, some of the traditions that are going around that we should be aware of with regards to the modern realities. That is because when it comes to the signs of the Day of Judgment, Bilad Ash-Sham, or this area of Syria, it plays a very vital role. And there are many traditions about Bilad Ash-Sham. And today we will be discussing not the authentic ones, but some of the ones that are very weak or fabricated, but are very common on the internet. Because we should warn against the weak and the fabricated traditions, because too much is being read in, and people might become absorbed in trying to recreate what they think the hadith says. And this is a common problem throughout history. So today's brief lecture is a summary of some of the more common, fabricated, or very weak traditions that I've seen being circulated on Twitter, on WhatsApp, on Facebook regarding the current situation in Bilad Ash-Sham. And by the way, we don't need weak and fabricated traditions. We have enough in the Qur'an and in the authentic Sunnah to tell us of the blessings of Bilad Ash-Sham. I just recited in Salatul Isha the whole verse about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioning that al-ard allati barakna hawlahu, that subhanalladhi asra bi'abdi laylan min al-masjid al-harami ila al-masjid al-aqsa. That the Masjid al-Aqsa, alladhi barakna hawlahu, everything around Masjid al-Aqsa is Mubarak. And Allah calls it al-ard al-muqaddas, and Allah calls it the Holy Land. And the Prophet ﷺ said in a number of authentic traditions, he said that, oh Allah, bless us in our Bilad Ash-Sham, bless us in our Bilad Ash-Sham, barik lana fi shamina. And he said this when Bilad Ash-Sham wasn't under Muslim control, it was under Roman control. And he said this is supposed to belong to us because this is where the prophets walk. This is the Holy Land. It belongs to us. So we don't need weak and fabricated traditions, and yet we find them commonly circulating amongst the masses. Now, before I get to one or two examples, very brief introduction. I know I've spoken about this a lot of times, but still, a quick, very quick refresher course. Why are there so many, weak and fabricated traditions? We need to understand the science of hadith is a very different science than any other science known to mankind. It is a unique science to the Muslim Ummah. No other tradition invented a tradition or a science like the sciences of hadith. There is the unanimous consensus of the scholars of Islam that the sciences of hadith are one of the unique contributions to human civilization that only Muslims have done. Jews did not have it. Christians did not have it. They didn't have a mechanism to sift what their prophets said, the good from the bad, the weak from the authentic. They had no mechanism. And we see this reality. As for us, from the time of the Sahaba Tabi'un, from the earliest of times, Muslims understood that we need to figure out how to separate what the Prophet ﷺ actually said from what is being attributed to him. Why? Because the Qur'an was compiled in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and within a year after he passed away, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu made the official copy of the Qur'an from Fatiha to Nas. As for hadith, hadith was organic. Hadith was not compiled in a book because it was not possible to compile in a book. Because the Prophet ﷺ spoke for 23 years. Sahaba heard him throughout his life. And so as the Sahaba spread, the knowledge of what they heard also spread. So you had Sahaba spreading a hadith where they went. But along with the Sahaba spreading what the Prophet ﷺ said, you had people fabricating. You had people who wanted to, figure out a mechanism to justify their theological deviation, their political deviation, or their own interpretations. And they made up statements attributing it to the Prophet ﷺ. Along with this, you had another factor, and that is the normal reality of faulty memory. Can you imagine a simple example? If all of your family came together and began recollecting memories of your great-grandparents, let's say the legends that came down, right? For sure, all of your, cousins, second cousins would have some stories exactly the same. And then within yourselves, you'll have a little bit of difference. And then maybe one person will have a complete unique story. Maybe he messed up, he got it from another source, and he attributed it to your great-grandfather by an accidental mistake. It wasn't fabrication. Same thing happened with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where you had intentional fabrication, and then you had faulty memories, people who don't know that well. And then you had the huffaz, the mutqinin, the scholars of hadith. So a science was developed called the science of hadith. And slowly but surely, there was a sifting that took place. And just to give you a simple example, a lot of people don't understand how difficult difficult and how complex this science is. This was the course of my undergraduate study when I was studying in Medina. There was an entire college called the College of Hadith, and that's what it specializes in. Over 650 original books exist about Hadith. Not 650. It is a massive encyclopedic enterprise. Scholars from the first generation and second generation all the way to the fifth generation, they are compiling original books of hadith. It's not just Bukhari and Muslim. You know Bukhari and Muslim because they're the best. In fact, over 600 books have been written in Islamic history attempting to compile hadith. The most famous of the earliest one is, of course, Imam Malik's Muwatta. Look at the date. Imam Malik died 179. So Imam Malik's Muwatta, 179. And then of the latest books, for example, the Mustadrak of al-Hakim or the Sunan of al-Bayhaqi, 458 Hijrah. So from 179 to 450, that's not the end. There's even some written in the beginning of the 500s, which is giving you one of the famous books written. Al-Bayhaqi, you hear it? He died 458. Imagine 458 to 179, 300 years difference, right? From the first to the last. Between the two, geographic regions, you had scholars in Yemen, you had scholars in Samarkand, you had scholars in Egypt, you had scholars in Mecca and Medina, you had scholars around the world, each one of them compiling. Now you have a large corpus of books, and you have to sift through them. And our scholars categorize these books. That's why out of these 600 plus books, 6 of them became more famous. They were considered to be the more authentic. And of these 6, 2 are the most authentic by pretty much unanimous consensus because their criterion or the strictest, that is Bukhari and Muslim. Now, long story short, I'm not going to teach obviously the sciences of hadith, but I will give you the reality, the end result. I'm going to give you the end result. How do you know if a hadith is authentic or not? The same way, how do you know which position of fiqh to follow? You have to ask the person whom you trust. That's all. There is no other way to do this. It's not your area of expertise, so you have to go to somebody whom you trust. And understandably, just like in any discipline, you're going to find a spectrum of opinion. Therefore, don't be surprised if a certain preacher or a speaker gives a hadith and says, oh, this is a good hadith, it's an authentic hadith. Another preacher says, no, this is not an authentic hadith. Such is the reality of hadith sciences. Don't be surprised. And one very important point to note, if somebody believes a hadith is weak because of a technical reason, this person is not rejecting what the Prophet ﷺ said. That's absolutely incorrect. The person is saying, I don't believe the Prophet ﷺ said it. There's a big difference between the two, right? One scholar might say this hadith is authentic. Another scholar says, no, I looked at this chain and I think this is weak. It's a technical ikhtilaf. So to reject a hadith because you think it is weak is not a rejection of what the Prophet ﷺ said. It's a rejection of him having said it. You see the difference between the two, right? And so please be careful of this distinction. Now, with that very long introduction, understand another point. Imam Ahmad famously remarked, there are 3 genres, the bulk of traditions are false in them. There are 3 areas, the bulk of what is narrated by the people, and Imam Ahmad, he's speaking around, 240 Hijrah. Imam Ahmad is speaking, in the middle of the 3rd century. Imam Ahmad says, there are 3 areas, the bulk of what the people narrate, it's not authentic. One of them, tafsir, another of them, maghazi, and the third of them, the signs of the Day of Judgment, which is our topic today. Imam Ahmad himself said, most of what the people say about what's going to happen and this is going to happen, this is not authentic. He realizes because this is where imagination, comes in. This is where people want to speak a lot about. So we have to be very careful when it comes to these types of traditions. Now, as I said, today I want to mention 1 or 2 very infamous, weak or very weak narrations about what is happening in Ash-Sham. The first of them, and again, because there are many authentic, and I mentioned some of them, and there's another khutbah I gave a few years ago, the blessings of Syria. When the revolution happened, I gave a khutbah about the blessings of Syria. I mentioned many of the authentic traditions. Today, I want to mention 1 or 2 of the most infamous, inauthentic ones that I see circulating. So the first of them I want to mention is the infamous narration that is reported in a number of traditions. Now again, pause here. The scholars of the past did not have a problem narrating a weak tradition with its chain because they're telling you that this is a weak chain. They're preaching and teaching to specialists. So Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he has in his book many traditions that he himself considered weak. No problem. Because he did not say, I'm only going to compile the authentic ones. That's Bukhari. If Bukhari has something in his Sahih, this means he thinks it is authentic. Muslim, this means authentic. As for Ahmad or Abu Dawud or the other books, they didn't have that high stringent condition. Why they didn't have it is beyond the scope of today's lecture, but suffice to say, if you had that strict condition, you would have to eliminate the bulk of traditions. That's why Bukhari really was the strictest, because he had a very high standard in doing so. So we have in Musnad Imam Ahmad many traditions that Imam Ahmad himself knew to be weak, but he wanted to record them, that you know the chain, because if you know the chain, you can figure out it is weak. So Imam Ahmad has it in his book, and it is also in the Mustadrak of al-Hakim, and it is also in other books, which is the infamous hadith about the black flags coming from Khurasan. The black flags coming from Khurasan. Khurasan, of course, it is Transoxania, and it is these days, it is like Afghanistan and Samarkand and those regions. This is the land of Khurasan. So there's a famous hadith, allegedly, that our Prophet ﷺ allegedly said, this is a contested hadith, when you see the black flags coming from Khurasan, then go to those black flags, because in that army will be Khalifatullah al-Mahdi. This is one version of the hadith. When you see the black flags coming, then go to that army and support them, because within them will be Khalifatullah al-Mahdi. And in Ibn Majah, a similar version, but a longer version, that allegedly a hadith goes that there shall be a civil war in which 3 armies will fight over a treasure. All of them are the sons of a Khalifa. They're all princes. And then none of them is going to be successful. And then a black flag will come with an army from Khurasan, and they will kill everybody like nobody else has been killed. Then when you see them, then go towards them, even if you have to crawl on ice, and give your allegiance to that army, because in that army is Khalifatullah al-Mahdi. And hadith. Now, this hadith is the famous hadith of the black flags, right? And throughout Islamic history, it has always been invoked that there's going to be an army of black flags, and that army was going to be the righteous army, and it will have the Mahdi within it. By the way, even a few years ago, when Afghanistan happened and, the group came over there, they also have the black flag, and Afghanistan is Khurasan. It is the same land over there. And so this hadith also became popular over there. And now we have it again being resurrected. But in fact, this hadith, according to many scholars, and this is my humble interpretation as well, their opinion as well, this hadith is actually not authentic at all. And it has been considered weak by many scholars, including Imam Ahmad, including in our times Dr. Hatim al-Auni, and the great Syrian scholar Sheikh Salahuddin al-Idlibi, and other scholars have written treatises in which they have made this hadith weak. Now, I don't want to get into technicalities, but understand one thing. When the Abbasids revolted against the Umayyads, the Abbasids, when did they revolt? Which year did they revolt? Who knows the year in Hijrah? Quick quiz. When did the Abbasids revolt against the Umayyads? Quick quiz. Close, very close. So, within the 2nd century, so the middle part of the 2nd century, meaning from 147 to 150-51 in this era. This is 100 years before Bukhari, by the way, right? This is 100 years before Bukhari, 70 years before Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. So the Abbasids revolted against the Umayyads, right? Around 149 Hijrah was when it really began. The main person who led the revolts was from Khurasan. And his name is Abu Muslim al-Khurasani. And the banner that he used was black. You see where this is heading? So a lot of scholars have pointed out that these genres of traditions seem to support the Abbasid revolt against the Umayyads. And that's why these versions of the hadith, none of them are found in Bukhari and Muslim. None of them are in the most authentic books. We find them in the tertiary collections, and some of them might have slightly weak. And so later scholars say, oh, this is slightly weak, this is slightly weak, this is slightly weak. Put together, it becomes Hasan. This is the opinion of some of our scholars. We respect that. Other scholars say actually, not only is every chain quite weak, but the content of it, it just goes against, it's fihi nakara. They say it's reject because it seems to very much, coordinate, if you like, or act as a instigator to the Umayyad and the Abbasid warfare that took place. And in fact, that's why Ibn al-Jawzi famously considered this hadith to be fabricated. Ibn al-Jawzi considered this hadith to be absolutely fabricated. And he put it in his famous book, Al-Mawdu'at. And this notion of the Abbasids using this, by the way, it was actually so common in their time. They were the ones using this hadith as well, that in fact, Al-Mansur, who is the real founder of the Abbasid dynasty, he's the one who founded the city of Baghdad. Al-Mansur named his son Abdullah al-Mahdi. He named his son al-Mahdi Abdullah, and his name is, his name is Muhammad, and his name is Muhammad. His name was Abdullah. Mansur's name is Abdullah. So his son was Al-Mahdi Muhammad ibn Abdullah. And Al-Mahdi became the Khalifa after his father, because the father quite literally wanted this hadith to apply to his son. Quite literally. He named his son Al-Mahdi, and he named his son Abdullah, and his name was, he named his son Muhammad, and his own name was Abdullah. So Muhammad ibn Abdullah, because another hadith says, the Mahdi will be called after me. The Mahdi will call after me. So the Khalifa al-Mansur quite literally wanted to enact a Hollywood script from these hadith. And he named his own son Al-Mahdi, because he was hoping that his son would be the actual Mahdi that Allah sent. And Al-Mahdi, by the way, is the father of Harun al-Rashid. Harun al-Rashid is the father, Al-Mahdi is the father of Harun al-Rashid. And if you read Al-Mahdi's biography, I don't want to say too much, but clearly he was not the Mahdi. Let's leave it at that, okay? So this is the reality, by the way, of politics and siyasa, right? So in reality, this hadith is very fishy. It doesn't make any sense. And every few generations, an army wants to implement it by using black flags. An army, literally, because the hadith mentions black flags, they want to imitate it and they want to find legitimacy. And so they use black flags, so much so that in our times, black flags themselves have become infamous. We don't want to use black flags because of all the chaos caused. But why was it caused? Because the first flag of the Abbasids was a black flag. They would use that against the Umayyads. And ever since then, and because of this hadith, every subsequent generation. So in the analysis of many scholars of hadith, including yours truly, I'm a student of knowledge, but I strongly say this hadith is not authentic. It's not in the most authentic narrations, and every chain is very weak, and the content does not make any sense at all. Another hadith we'll mention, and then shall call it a day. And this one I'm seeing, literally, I saw at least 10 accounts mentioning it all over social media. It is called the famous hadith of the Sufyani. The hadith of the Sufyani hadith. And this hadith is not even found in the Kutub al-Sitta. It's actually found in the very tertiary books. As I said, there's 600 plus books of original hadith written. One of the most obscure ones, which is full of very weak and fabricated narrations about the Day of Judgment. It is called Kitab al-Fitan of Nu'aym ibn Hammad. Kitab al-Fitan. It's a 2-volume book, and it's all about the signs of the Day of Judgment. And it is well known to be full of extremely shady, very apocryphal, very dubious hadith, which just too vivid, too much detail. It's not a source book at all, but of course it exists. And this narration of Sufyani is found in that book, Kitab al-Fitan. Is found in this book. And it reads as follows, that the Arabic is very long, يَخْرُجُ رَجُلٌ يُقَالُ لَهُ السُّفْيَانِي, that a man will come who shall be called a Sufyani, from a Sufyan. A man will come, he will be called a Sufyani, and he will come from the depths of Damascus. By the way, Ibn al-Jawzi, Ibn al-Qayyim, Ibn Taymiyyah, other scholars say, anytime a hadith is very specific about the future, know that it is fabricated. One of the signs of fabrication is that it mentions names and dates and specific occurrences. Our Prophet didn't speak like that. He spoke in generalities about the signs of the Day of Judgment. So now you have, there are hadith that mention, in the year such and such, this will happen. There are hadith that mention right now, from the land of Damascus, a man by the name of Sufyan will come out. It's not something that is normal in authentic hadith. These are signs that this hadith is very fishy. So the hadith goes on, alleged hadith. A man will come from Damascus, from the depths of Damascus, by the name of Sufyan. The majority of his followers will be from the tribe of Kalb. He will kill everybody to the extent of ripping open the bellies of women and killing the unborn children. Then the tribe of Qais will gather against him, and he will kill all of them, leaving no one to be able to prevent the harm that he is doing. Then a man will come from my household, Ahl Bayt the Mahdi. A man will come from my household. He would rise in the district of Al-Harra, and the news will reach al-Sufyani. He will send an army to confront him, but they will be defeated. Sufyani will then march with his own forces. Then when they reach a desert area by the name of Al-Bayda, Allah will cause the earth to swallow them, and none of the Sufyani army will survive except a few who will tell others what happened. End hadith. Now, this hadith is now being forwarded everywhere because I don't want to get too specific, but they're interpreting a certain person to be the Sufyani, another person to be the tribe of Kalb, another group to be the tribe of Qais, and everybody. So they literally read this hadith, they look at what is happening, and they start assigning like children playing games. You play this, you play this, you play this. And then they pretend this hadith is applying over here. This should never be done, even with authentic traditions, much less weak and fabricated traditions. This should never be done, even with authentic traditions. Our scholars unanimously say, never take something that you find even in authentic hadith and presume that an incident in your generation is exactly what the Prophet referred to. How do you know? Could be another generation. You may interpret, you may say maybe, but never categorically link. Because history has shown every few generations something happens, and great scholars link an authentic hadith with what happens. Turns out they were wrong. In fact, even the Sahaba, they thought that Dajjal was amongst them. And the next tabi'un, they thought another person Dajjal. And the next person, every few generations, somebody comes and says, oh, this Dajjal, Dajjal, Dajjal. Well, alhamdulillah, he has not yet come, and may we never live to see him. Maybe we not ever see, that time that comes straight. So never, ever apply even an authentic hadith to current events. How much more so when it is weak and fabricated? So this hadith talks about a figure known as Sufyani. What does Sufyani refer to? From the descendants of Sufyan, Abu Sufyan. And right then and there, you realize something is fishy here, right? Because the Umayyads were despised by many groups of people, especially those who supported the Ahl-Bayt. And so the notion is not that I'm defending the Umayyads or criticizing. I'm just being factual right now. The Umayyads have a lot of good and they have a lot of bad as well. Just look at what they've done. A lot of good and a lot of bad. This is the reality, right? So I'm not defending, I'm not criticizing. I'm telling you factually, the Ahl-Bayt, the supporters of the Ahl-Bayt, the Shi'a to Ahl-Bayt, they obviously did not like the Umayyads at all for many legitimate reasons. And so to say that there will be a civil war between a Sufyani and between an Ahl-Bayt, automatically, this is the reality of what was happening for the first 100 years of the Umayyad rule. Multiple civil wars between Hussein and radiallahu an and the Umayyads, and between Zayd and the Umayyads, and between so many times between so many of the Ahl-Bayt and between the Umayyads. And then the Abbasids, I'll teach you a little bit of history, you should know this bit. The Abbasids, they double-crossed. They're politicians in the end of the day. The Abbasids allied with the Shia to Ahl-Bayt. The Abbasids said, we're on your side. The Abbasids formed an alliance, Shia to Ahl-Bayt. And then they revolted against the Umayyads. As soon as they got to power, first thing they did, massacred all of the Umayyads. Literally, they invited them to a peace treaty. They invited them to a banquet. Literally. This is one of the most infamous episodes of Islamic history. They promised them safety and security, and then they shut the doors and they massacred down to every last child. And then they massacred Abu Muslim al-Khurasani, their own general. Their own leader, they killed him because he was getting too powerful, too popular. And then they backstabbed the Shia to Ahl-Bayt, whom they said that they would ally with. And they cut them off, imprisoned their imams, so on and so forth. This is politics. I'm not defending. I'm just telling you what happened. This is politics, right? So you can imagine in this, there were many battles that took place between the Sufyanids, i.e. the Umayyads, and between the Ahl-Bayt. So to have a hadith that says there shall be a civil war between the Sufyanid and he's going to kill people in the worst manner and then a Mahdi figure will come. I mean, you automatically see it doesn't make any sense. And like I said, hardly any scholar consider this to be an authentic hadith. So please don't forward the Sufyani hadith. It is definitely not an authentic hadith. One final point that I want to mention here. A lot of people have asked me for my opinions about the reality of what is happening right now in Bilad Ash-Sham. Listen, brothers and sisters, I love to talk about classical stuff. I love Islamic history. I love Aqidah. I love Seerah. I try my best to not get involved in political analysis, because I firmly believe it's not the job of scholars to do so. And when we do so, detailed political analysis of current events, I think our mistakes probably are more than what is correct. And this is something I'm not saying. Ibn Khaldun very famously remarked this. Ibn Khaldun, go read his Muqaddimah. He has a chapter. Go check this out. Chapter number 42. The chapter heading is called, "The majority of ulama are the furthest people from politics." This is the chapter heading. Ulama ab'adu nasi an siyasa. Literally has this. He is making a remark here. The least qualified people to run political affairs. And I'm speaking as somebody who is inshallah part of the scholarly tradition. I studied in that tradition. I love that tradition. And yet I warn ulama from getting involved in politics. I warn this and I try my best to implement it myself. Why? Ibn Khaldun remarks. And by the way, just for the advanced people in the audience here, subhanAllah, what did Plato say about the ideal ruler? Who knows? Plato, Aflatun. Plato said the ideal ruler is who? The philosopher, the philosoph, the aqlani, the rajul of aql. Plato, in his theoretical mind, said the intellectual person should be the leader. Ibn Khaldun is the exact opposite. Ibn Khaldun is like, you should never put the intellectuals and the philosophical class and the ulama as leaders. And he says it in a polite way, but I will reinterpret. He says it very politely. He says that is because the ulama, they speak in generalities and they speak in idealistic language and they speak in, I'm going to say, he didn't say utopic visions and dreams, right? And they don't actually get involved down to the nitty-gritty of real. So let ulama preach utopic ideals. We want to lift people up to those ideals. When ulama try to apply those ideals to the reality, they mess up big time. And we see this anytime a group of clerics think they will run the country. Look, reality. And I say this with love and respect. I know my critics go berserk over this, but I can't change facts. Go look around you. Look around you. Wherever modern scholarship has taken over a country, look at what it has done. The very people start to, astaghfirullah, hate Islam, a'udhu billah. Because scholars don't understand. People are not qualified to be all the way up there. You have to start at the bottom. And that's why Ibn Khaldun points this out, that look, scholars are great for khutbahs and durus. Scholars are great to inspire, but scholars are not qualified to actually rule over. And that's why, look at Islamic history. Only in the time of Khulafa al-Rashidun. That's it. That's why they're Khulafa al-Rashidun. That's it. And even their people could not live up to their standards. That's why what happened. Even in the time of Ali radiallahu anhu, and he was who he was, the people could not live up to that. This is the reality, the disconnect between theory and reality. We see this. And with utmost respect, look at the Arab Spring. I don't want to get too blunt here, but everybody, look at your own countries. The good people who went into politics, where are they now? Where are they? I'm not being too explicit, but you know where I'm from. Look at what happened back there. And look at Egyptians, look at others as well. So my humble advice as a student of history to my brothers in Syria, and I know it's not going to reach them, but it's generic advice. Learn from the mistakes of the last 20 years, rather the last 1,400 years. Learn from history. Learn from history. Don't expect society to become ideal overnight. You have to give freedoms to everybody. We want religious folks to be religious. We want religious folks to be able to preach and teach. But in order for them to preach and teach, you cannot enforce a harsh version on other people. And therefore, levels of freedom for everybody is actually the lesser of two evils. And that's why in America and in Western lands, we can flourish the way we can flourish. This is the reality, the awkward reality that most people of a theoretical ilmi nature don't understand. Learn from history, understand. When you let others live, they will let you live. When you let others breathe, they will let you breathe as well. But when you try to enforce one very narrow version, whatever it might be, whether it's Ba'athism, whether it's harsh secularism, whether it is your version of Islamic law and the people don't want it, well then what happens. So learn from history. My sincere advice to them is that the goal, we want religiosity to be something that is cherished. We want preachers and ulama to have the freedoms to preach and not be criminalized. And perhaps the only way to do that is to allow people a level of freedom that everybody can, inshallah ta'ala, accommodate. We make dua for our brothers and sisters in Syria. We make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses them. We make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides safety and comfort for all of the people and allows them to be a role model for other Muslim nations around the world. Inshallah, we'll continue next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.